Matt, the first of the two here, was a senior advisor to Bill Clinton, a name that some of you might be familiar with, and also a communications director for Uber North America. He has co-founded Greenbriar to help individuals and corporations avoid, manage, and recover from crisis. And so I was reflecting on that, and I thought, Matt is your man when the shit hits the fan. And so we're going to have him up here. And in addition, we also have Taylor of Lime. Who's familiar with Lime? Right. The thing that you wedge in a margarita. We're all on the same page, so that's good. No, they're transforming mobility, and they're going about it in a way that is uncharacteristic of a lot of the players in that space. And so between the two of them, this is going to be a really exciting mutual fireside chat. So please help me welcome them to the stage.
Thanks. Thanks. This is a recent injury, so I feel bad for the guy.
You guys got to go easy on me.
Well, I'm excited to be here. And first of all, thanks for having us, and thanks for dialing in the perfect weather. It's good to be in Charleston, and anytime you can skip work to go talk about work is always fun. So I want to kick it off with a question to Matt. We're here to talk about policy, regulation, working with cities, how you navigate it all, crises and issues management. So Matt, when we think about tech companies, disruptors, innovators, working with cities, working with policymakers, what are just some best practices for doing so to kick that off?
I think that, well, first of all, I think that's evolving, right? Yep. I think we're living in a time where the answer to that question is changing in real time. And we've gotten to a place where coming in the front door with a smile is actually starting to work better than the way that we used to do it. So asking for permission is sort of supplanting asking for forgiveness, but also like making friends has sort of taken the place of making enemies. And it's happened in the scheme of things. It's happened very quickly. Taylor and I were at Uber together in 2015, and 4 years, for those of you who work in tech, know is an eternity, but in the real world, where people work for a living, 4 years really isn't that long. So it's I think, communicating with regulators and policymakers, understanding how you can help them and they can help you, that's like kind of a new thing. But I'd also be interested to know, someone who's still in the business, I've retired, what you think.
I think you're right. It's, when we talk about partnering with the cities, it really is a partnership with cities. You have to build that line of communication. You have to go in and offer something of value. When you go in and you drop robots on sidewalks or scooters in the streets, that isn't always well received. And so coming in and educating about the tech and the product and answering questions about how it works is really valuable. What we have done at Lime and I'm really proud of is our approach to entering new markets is starting that conversation, doing the education with both consumers as well as policymakers and having them understand the technology. Building that line of communication goes a long way. So, when there is something that goes wrong, and it inevitably will, there's somebody that they can call and pick up the phone and have a discussion with about it. Or if there's an innovation and we're changing the way we do things, notifying the city and letting them know first really saves a bunch of heartache. And then the other thing I would say too is offering value. At Lime and at Uber and elsewhere, and in technology in general, data is king, and data is really valuable for cities. It's really valuable for understanding how do we improve our communities? How can we make urban life better? And one of the things that we found early on at Lime is taking that data, protecting consumer privacy and anonymizing it in a way that we're not jeopardizing our users and riders, but offering cities a chance to take a look at where traffic lights should be installed, where bike lanes might be better implemented, because we're seeing patterns of scooter riders go from A to B. Same with Uber and rideshare. So having something of value that you offer cities and giving them that open line of communication goes a really long way. But I would say, one of the things that tech companies are often concerned about is regulation being a burden to growth. And so how do you navigate that burden? How do you go into a city and work together without breaking rules and ignoring policymakers? And I'd love to hear your perspective, and I can jump in.
Yeah, I think that the mentality for so long has been that regulators, cities, policymakers, politicians, whatever you want to call that group of people, are an obstacle to growth.
Yep.
And, we're going to make a lot of Uber examples, and I'm going to try not to pick on them, but, when we would roll into Portland, and this is basically the case with any new thing in Portland, San Francisco, the reaction you get from policymakers is, we're against that. What is it? Right? In that order. But they start out against it. So you got a hell of a hill to climb, right? To convince them that it's a good thing, one, and it's a good thing for them. So I think there's an education curve. But we're living in a new world where neither side can do it by themselves.
Yep.
Right? The public side can't do it by themselves, and the companies can't either, and they have got to figure out how to come together.
Yep.
But I would ask you the same question. Like, if you're at Lime, how do cities become an accelerant to growth and not the opposite?
And we found, so we've been on Lime for 2 years now, and we're in over 100 markets, 5 continents. What is today, Thursday?
I don't know.
So today we are announcing 50 million trips across the globe, and that's a lot of rides in 2 years.
Wait, hang on. When I see like 3 drunk people in Santa Monica on the same scooter, like, how does
counts as one
that
trip.
counts? Okay.
And that is.
I've always wondered that. Don't do that.
Don't
it's not
do that.
safe.
That is not safe. That is against policy. But we've grown tremendously quickly because we know that going into these communities and working together can actually accelerate growth. And so the thinking that regulation is going to be burdensome, it's going to slow our ability to expand, that is old thinking. And this notion of asking for permission is not new, but I think the reversion back to it is something we're starting to see. Healthcare, finance, those are industries where they have been working with regulators for decades, and they've seen it work and scale and success as a result. And so we're sort of going back to that model because we know it works. And so, Lime in 100 plus cities, we've done that because we've been working together with cities from day one very collaboratively and building policy together. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of education. There's a big learning curve, like you said, about how this all works and what it means for communities. And so being able to have that discussion early actually allowed us to accelerate growth and find opportunities to collaborate with cities.
I think about this, again, like this new friendship, right, between companies and regulators. I'm curious what you think that companies can learn from policymakers.
Yeah, it's a great question because there's a big divide. I mean, I live in Washington D.C. Spent a bunch of time in San Francisco, as you have, and they're really different cities, and the cultures are different. And I think the mindset behind technology and regulation and policy, there's a massive gap. And so we talk about the education piece of it and opening that direct line of communication. But I think putting yourselves in the shoes of policymakers, of elected officials, and recognizing what it is they want. I think they're motivated by 3 things. One, does this fix something in my city? Is there a challenge I'm trying to solve? And what is it? And can I get behind it? 2, is it something that my constituents want? When we think about rideshare or scooter sharing, it is solving this last mile solution. It's giving people an affordable way to get around, and constituents want it. It's filling something they care about. And then 3 is, does it align with my political views? Does my political party respect this position? And you have to consider that when you're looking at regulators. And so understanding that audience and who you're working with, and then going to them and explaining that. So, yes, there is a challenge with congestion or emissions or safety, or not enough hotels in my city, and so Airbnb is a great solution. We are giving people that ability to get out of cars, get an affordable way from the bus stop to their office, or leave it at home because there's now a new alternative. So we're solving congestion and pollution challenges. And the other piece of that is, do constituents want it? And again, going back to Uber, there was a massive grassroots component because it filled a void and people were really behind it. And we see the same thing with Lime, and that's how we've hit 50 million trips is there is a big demand. And so understanding that about policymakers and translating your business in that way is valuable. And I think on the flip side is, what can policymakers understand about the tech community that they may not? I think I'll turn to you, but it's again that challenge and what we're here to solve.
I don't think you need to look very far to see an education gap, right? How many of you watched Mark Zuckerberg testify for Congress like a year ago or so? Yeah. Senator Hatch from Utah asked him, seriously, deadpan, how does Facebook make money? And he was reading from notes, right? And the average age of his staff is 30, maybe. So that question didn't come out of the blue. So we have a ways to go, right? Before somebody that important, that influential on Capitol Hill still doesn't understand how Facebook can be free but still make money. We got a ways to go. And I think, so I'll pick on Senator Hatch, but then I'll pick on Elizabeth Warren just to make it seem balanced. Elizabeth Warren says she wants to regulate Facebook. Well, that's fine, but what does that mean? It's a great headline. It's you can use it to raise money, but I think that these folks, whether it's one of the 73 people running for president or just people who are just on a committee that matters, they don't understand what's going on. And so if you can find one that wants to learn, and I mean, that's the Venn diagram, right? They have to want to learn and they have to matter to you. And the middle of that Venn diagram is going to be a very small number of people, but I think that's who we should be talking to. Yeah, Warren Hatch, he didn't want to learn. He matters, but he doesn't want to learn.
And I think that raises, we're in Charleston, this is an amazing tech hub, and you're starting to see, in Raleigh, North Carolina, or Austin, or Boston, not just San Francisco, DC, there's a thriving scene. There are cities that are eager for innovation, they're eager to adopt the latest and greatest, and it's finding those champions, and it's going out and making sure that you are educating your policymakers across the country and not just in major metros where you want to thrive because there are more people. We were mentioning Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I mean, I say Tulsa all the time. The last thing a tech company wants to hear when they have a new widget or a new app or thing, frozen grapes delivered by drones or whatever the thing is, right? The last thing they want to hear is, whatever you do, don't launch in San Francisco. They hate that because they want to go to San Francisco. It's the tech hub. It's all, you have to be in San Francisco. But scooters are a good example, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's not a scooter town. It's one of the hilliest towns in the country. And two, so literally the landscape is bad, but also the political landscape is bad for the same reason I mentioned earlier. Hey, this is my new thing. Well, we're against it. By the way, what is it? So you don't get that reaction in Tulsa. I had food delivered to my hotel room in Buffalo 18 months ago by a robot. And I guarantee you the city of Buffalo is not only welcoming that company with open arms, but probably subsidizing them in some way, right? So no one wants to hear don't go to San Francisco, but the Tulsas and the Buffaloes and Billings, in Montana where I'm from, they want to be on the vanguard of this stuff. We work with a robot looks like a rolling trash can delivery company in San Francisco. And so they're testing these things on the sidewalks, and city of San Francisco kicked them out before they even knew what it was. So they go, 30 miles south to Burlingame or whatever, and the city's happy to have them, and they're on the sidewalks and no one's trying to steal them or spray paint them or whatever. So I do think that we need to look beyond San Francisco to, like Taylor said, places like Charleston, you know, as we try to figure out where the next thing is. But yeah, don't discount Tulsa.
Yeah, and I think the reason being it's solving a problem, and there are real challenges that these cities face, and cities talk to each other. And I mean that's the other point of this is, you know, when you go into a market and you ask for permission and you open that dialogue and you give them a cell phone to call if something goes wrong, they appreciate that. And you know, LA knows what New York is doing, who knows what Boston is doing, and they know whether micromobility is working in that community or not. And they're looking at San Diego or elsewhere and seeing thousands of scooters in the street, but they're seeing them work really well. And you've got local teams who are managing those fleets and taking care of the issues. And they've got a real strong partnership with those communities. And so when cities talk to each other, it not only perpetuates your approach, and so we talked earlier about, you know, is this a burden or can this help accelerate? It really does help accelerate, because if you get that reputation of working together and being a collaborator with communities, that advances your business even more quickly. And the other thing I'd say is, you know, we are in an age now where media, consumers, policymakers are all sharper than ever. And spinning your story and talk about your story, I'd love to dive in that in a minute, but you know, spinning your story or being a black box around data or your intent doesn't work anymore. And you know, you spent time on political campaigns. You know, how has honesty and transparency actually been something that has served you well? And you know, we walked in here earlier and Matt's like, I've been to literally 4-digit figures of events and conferences, and you know, you've learned a ton over the years doing this. Like, how does honesty and transparency and being up here and sharing actually serve you and what you're trying to achieve?
I mean, that's changed a lot too, right? If you think about, not to be doom and gloom, but if you think about aviation disasters that have been handled well and have been handled not well, the ones that are handled well all start with some version of, here's what we know. And, you know, I did a lot of safety communications at Uber, which is basically like you get the call when something terrible happens in an Uber. Starting with here's what we know is so incredibly disarming to either a reporter or a policymaker, because spin and killing stories isn't a thing anymore. Right? That's someone tells you to spin this some way or kill this story, they've like watched too much West Wing or House of Cards or whatever. Like that doesn't happen anymore. Everyone with a telephone and a Twitter account is a reporter now, right? So there's just so much. What's that? There's this. What's the sunlight is the transparency is the best medicine. You know which one I'm.
Disinfectant, sunlight.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean. Just because I can't remember it doesn't mean I don't practice it. But I really do think that, and look, you're often, especially whether it's, you know, sex assault in ride sharing or like the 737 MAX 8 crash, I think oftentimes you're going to be, what is going to be holding you back is a lawyer somewhere. Or in the case of Boeing, probably like 2 floors worth of lawyers, right? Because they don't want you to say anything because you expose yourself to litigation. But I don't, you know, to any of you who are communications professionals out there, I can't stress enough how important that you keep pushing on transparency and keep pushing for a here's what we know posture rather than a crouch, hide under the desk, and hope it goes away, which is like what we did at Uber in 2015. And, you know, you've all read some news stories about Uber between like 2015 and 2017. It wasn't great. But if you look at the companies, I think, that just say, hey, here's what happened. We're sorry, or here's what happened and we're trying to fix it. Those are the ones we forget about.
Yeah. Well, and you forget about it for a reason and in a good way. It did not become an issue. It was not. You have one first impression, right? So when you go into a city, you call up a policymaker. You're in the midst of a crisis you're trying to manage. You have one opportunity to make a first impression with your audiences, whether it be regulators or your consumers. And if you do that in a way that is open and transparent and honest, it will move. Our news cycles are evolving, and they're incredibly rapid, and they are less than 24 hours now these days. And so, these issues will move forward, but you will remember it if you handle it the wrong way. You will not if you handle it the proper way. And so that honesty, that transparency, being a partner as you're navigating these issues is something that is invaluable. And I think cities know that, and companies are recognizing that too. And to your point, what you say and how you say it will be remembered if it is not the right thing.
Yeah. What is the best way to understand what motivates a particular policymaker? Because you're dealing with, if the difference between a county commissioner, a city planner, and a U.S. senator or a governor, those are all different critters.
Yeah,
and
exactly right.
they're like same genus, very different species.
Yeah.
Where are the levers, and how do you?
It's a great question, and understanding your business and who your audiences are is the first step of that. And transportation, it's really exciting and it's moving really quickly, which I love, and every day is different. However, your audiences are different, and so the way we move around our cities and the way we connect with transit is very local. We're not engaging our state senator around the scooters on the corner of our streets. Regulation and policy making is happening at the state level and federal and other industries, but this is a very local business, and so understanding that your local DOT is an important player here. They're building bike infrastructure that we need to protect our riders and to make sure that micromobility can thrive in communities. Who is your city council member that cares about this and has constituents, over in Anacostia and DC who don't have a metro stop and are paying, $8-9 in an Uber when they could hop on a scooter for $2? And it's so finding your champions and understanding what they care about. Is it equity? Is it just greater convenience for their constituents? And what are those levers that turn them? In any campaign, and this very well, any campaign, you have decision makers, and there are levers that turn those decision makers. And when it comes to mobility, again, it's finding what they care about, it's finding what their constituents care about, and then working together to solve those or fix those or advance those. I think that's a key.
But you can't create a cookie cutter playbook, right?
No.
Because what works in Tulsa doesn't work in Portland, doesn't work in Virginia Beach.
Exactly right.
So how do you, how do you do that? At scale is my least favorite phrase in probably in the world. But how do you do that in Sydney, Australia, and also Charleston?
Yeah. And first of all, it's amazing how scooters are a thing, right? We had bikes 6 months ago and 12 months ago, and now bikes are no longer that popular, and people want to be on a scooter. And it's incredible how quickly this whole thing has evolved. But I think there's a couple threads that unite it all, and one is it's convenient and disruptor. We all throw out that term, but ride sharing disrupted the taxi industry. Dockless has disrupted the docked. And people want that convenience. They want the ability to hit a button and have, whether it's transportation or food, show up and then get to where they need to be and not have to walk a block or not have to go find a station. And so, there are uniting threads within these communities that people are yearning for, and it's equity, it's affordability, it's convenience. And so building a model that works at that sort of high level and then translating that to your local community is the most important piece of it. And so Washington, D.C., again, I'll go back to, we have 600 scooters in the city as Lime. DC's a really big city. 600 scooters probably isn't enough to serve the community effectively. You've got, thousands in San Diego or Portland or elsewhere. So how do you justify that? And it's because you're working with regulators and policymakers who have issues they care about and they're trying to solve for. And it's making sure you're translating that to the local level. And so, we talk about scaling our businesses. Again, it's that upfront open line of communication and building together. And whether it is simply educating about your product or technology and making people feel comfortable with it, so when they are on the streets, they know how to use it. They know where to get a helmet. They know where the throttle or brake is. It's educating people about it. And then secondly, it's crafting the right rules together. We've done this in over 120-ish markets, and this isn't our first time putting policy together around micromobility, and so we're learning a whole lot as we go. We know where scooters should be placed in communities and what works and what doesn't, and so it's taking those learnings and adapting those to local markets, and being, again, transparent and open about it. Look, we're in DC and we know that 600 doesn't effectively serve the community, and so when we go to New York City, for instance, how do we make sure that we're educating properly and we're taking those learnings and improving and becoming a better company, but also becoming a better facilitator of urban life, essentially. Right. So it's at scale, finding the right policy, but then translating it to the local level.
Yeah. What's after scooters, right? So we've gone from, in 7 years, from cabs to rideshare to bikes to scooters.
Yeah.
I feel like dockless bikes were sort of like the like CDs, right? We could have gone straight from tapes to ones and zeros, and we could have skipped over.
I'm ready for the autonomous dockless scooter that is essentially like what Marty McFly was around in Back to the Future. Yeah, right. So we're gonna be at a hoverboard.
You heard it here first. You guys are all gonna go short hoverboard stock.
But what I think is interesting about the space, and whether it's micromobility or delivery or food, and what is Travis working on now? The smaller kitchens that are sort of these hubs for delivery, these industries move so quickly, and like our news cycles, everything is changing, and you have to adapt the product. You have to be able to, we call it Lime speed at Lime. Things are just moving so incredibly fast that we are operating at a level that is uncomfortable for cities, and we have to be able to say, look, we're pivoting here, and you're going to be the first to know. Or this product we are seeing is no longer serving the need of your constituents. Bicycles in many communities, but scooters are really well resonating really well with your community. And so we're going to do this, but we're going to be open about it. And here are the reasons why. And we'll give you a chance to weigh in, and we can craft the right rules for it. And so, the pace at which tech in particular, but micromobility even more specifically, is moving, we have to be nimble, but we have to be willing to work with cities and educate them on that pace and that clip at which we're moving.
Great.
I want to touch on issues and crises management, because I know you've seen a fair share in your life, and we talk about being transparent and open and honest. What is the general approach that you've seen work, and outside of being transparent, when you've got a client and they're facing, whether it's a legal or a reputational issue challenge of the day, how do you counsel clients to be prepared for that? And as there's a lot of tech companies out here that I know will face issues that you had never imagined might be a challenge, and we're seeing at Lime that things that we didn't envision are now not crises or issues, but just consumer behavior. How do we adapt to it, or the change in the marketplace? How do we change our model as well? How do you prepare clients to do that?
When I first heard about scooters, when I first heard that you can make money by charging them, I should have predicted this, but I didn't think people were going to be burning their houses down with 100 of them in their garage hooked up to 15 surge protectors, but you can predict there's going to be vehicle accidents.
Yeah.
We think about crisis two different ways. And if you think about it sort of like healthcare, it's an easy analogy. We do emergency room work, right? someone calls in the middle of the night and they need to go to the ER. And that's actually, it's not easier, but it's much more formulaic. All these things fall into one of a few different categories, and it's just stop the bleeding triage. And then we also do like predictive and preventative. So come into a company, find out what they do, and then try to guess based on that, what are 70 things that could go wrong at this place?
Yep.
And then make recommendations to avoid maybe 20 of those things. But the other 50 are going to happen no matter what. If you're renting scooters to people, someone is going to get in a vehicle accident.
Yep.
They just are. And then writing that playbook for when that happens, putting it on a shelf and hoping you won't have to use it, but knowing that you will, so that when that thing does happen, you're prepared. So whatever the healthcare example of that is, you're going to, getting regular exercise, you got your nutrition in order, and you know that when like this thing starts to hurt, you need to stop doing, whatever the case is. So, understanding the difference between the ER visit and the preventative care, I think is really important.
And I think too, sorry to interrupt, we understand that, and we have to be prepared, and we have to have the right response. But taking that to your regulator, your policymaker, your city, and sharing that information and saying, look, we know when we come into your market, there are going to be some issues we're going to have. Scooters are going to end up on the sidewalk because there's no protected bike lane, and riders feel safer. We know that scooters should not be on the sidewalk ridden, but we know they do end up there. And so, how do we make sure that we inoculate against that? We know that there are going to be safety issues. How are we better preparing for that? And if you go to your city and your regulator and you have that conversation and you show the playbook and you show how you're going to respond to it, it makes the process so much easier and so much more effective, and then you accelerate. Again, this isn't a burden. This helps actually grow your business by tackling these challenges together.
Well, then you're walking in the door with answers to the 8 of their first 10 questions.
Exactly right.
What do I do when these scooters end up in the lake in the middle of my city, right?
And the more you scale your business and the more you grow from market to market, or from community to your underserved part of town to your business improvement district, you learn different parts about those communities. And so taking those even at a small granular level and adjusting your business and working with regulators to say, like, in this area, we know that we need to make this adjustment, but we've seen it work in the other 100 cities, and so trust us on this. It goes a long way because, again, cities talk to each other and regulators are not in a bubble, and you've got to embrace that.
Can I take some questions?
Yes, we want to ask questions.
Yeah.
I want to, before we go there, the theme is what's your story? So I got to ask, what is your story? And you can answer it however you want to answer it, and then I'll do the same.
Oh man, my story. I really like doing this stuff, and I feel just really lucky that I get to do it from a place like Montana. And I think that if I learned one thing at Uber, it's live to work, or sorry, work to live, not the
nailing these today.
I haven't quite beaten it out of me yet. It's still
practice it.
It's still dormant in there. But I think that as you cross the 40 years old Rubicon, you start to realize that this stuff is interesting, but it's not the most interesting thing in your life, and it's important, but it's probably not the most important thing in your life. I just feel really lucky that I get to spend more time outside than inside, and come spend a few minutes in front of a bunch of smart people like y'all.
That was more heartfelt than I was going to share, but one of the things I like about coming to these type conferences is it's actually walking around and seeing the booths and talking to the entrepreneurs and the innovators and the folks out there who are starting businesses and companies and hearing their story. We all have a story to tell, and as Matt said earlier, we are all reporters and publishers and content creators. We have something important to offer, and so we have an opportunity to do that. And I think recognizing that there's a story to tell and positioning yourself in an interesting and unique way is super valuable. And we at Lime, we're a global organization, but we have a story to tell, and that's my job, is to go out there and promote it. Or if you are creating the next greatest thing that we haven't yet seen, somebody's going to hear that story, and I think focusing on that and making sure that's part of your business strategy is super important. So, I'm eager to get out there and learn more and hear more about the stories with you guys. But we've got a few minutes left, so we'd love to open to questions, and or if not, we can keep chatting. But we welcome them. Yeah.
So I've started 5 startup ecosystems in North Carolina. In your experience of giving the examples of Tulsa and Buffalo, what can cities do to help entrepreneurs? What are tactical things they can do to really build that ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question. One is it's a partnership, and so when you go into these communities and you sit down together and you understand, here are the challenges we face as a city. So I went to school in Chapel Hill and very fond of the state, but you didn't walk anywhere. You were in cars, and you were going from Raleigh to Durham to Chapel Hill, or whether it's hotels, game days in that part of the state. What are the challenges that the city is facing or that community has? And then how do you sit down together to craft the right approach? And I think cities can, whether it's tax incentives with, the Amazons of the world, or simply, we will paint bike lanes on this street because the data you have shared has shown that people are going from here to here and we didn't know that, or there's a traffic light here that's really poorly timed. We'll open up the purse strings to give you some favor because we know you're improving our city. And so I think it's identifying where the challenges are. And then there are little things that, whether it's the policymaker around healthcare or transportation or the DOT, they can make adjustments in how they operate their organizations to support your business growth. And I think you see that with scooters, again, for instance, come in with a few hundred, people use them and they work well. And if you can demonstrate to that community that you've got it under control and we're operating really well, and we need more in this part of the city because our data shows that they're going here but they're not coming back, the city will be willing to work with you. So I think it's about commitment to solutions together, but also being willing to share and a little give and take. And so whether it's financial or more kind of operational, cities are willing to bend over backwards if it's improving something and offering value.
Especially if you don't drop 10,000 scooters in the middle of the city on day one, right?
Yep.
I'm not going to name any names, but that's not the way Lime operates.
Yep, that helps.
Sir?
So one of the interesting things that I've seen over the evolution of the decade of doing startup stuff is the first mover advantage to each new entry into a market space. With Uber, you had Lyft, the first, but each of these companies comes in and then starts building the market space, and it's just a land grab. Mm-hmm. What's really interesting about what's happening with Lime and other things, Lyft and Uber, is regulatory access is like first mover advantage. Who's getting in, who's offering the most data, who's building the best relationships.
Yep.
Because it's really interesting to watch new companies creep along that don't have the same barriers to entry, even into the same cities. So how do you guys address that?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, and again, it's first impression matters, and you have one opportunity to do so. And when cities talk to each other and they say, look, Lime came in and sat down with us and introduced the model and shared how it works, and then we crafted legislation together, that goes a long way. And when it is a land grab in those early days, when it was just, rushing to be first to market, you have to be poised and you have to know that just because there are other competitors out there, no matter what space, doing what you're doing, they may not have the same understanding of how to work with policymakers. And so when we talk about, what motivates them and what drives them and what are the levers that turn them, having that understanding, focus, commitment when you go into communities is really, really invaluable to get regulation in place that is going to benefit your model. And, I think when you talk about first movers, they could craft regulations and might be good for their business, which isn't scaled globally, which doesn't have the the vision necessarily to be present in 2 or 3 or 5 years. And so how do you go in and craft the right rules? And so just because they're first doesn't mean that those regulations are the right ones. And it's leveraging your experience and your expertise and again, learning about the policymakers. And you may be entering one city, but if you go into that one city with the knowledge and the commitment to doing it right, it'll serve you well in the long run.
I also think there's something to be said for some coalition building amongst competitors, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
just because that Uber and Lyft, put their logos on the top of a letterhead and send it to the Portland City Council, that doesn't mean that Uber and Lyft have laid down their swords and they've just decided we're going to get in this together.
Yep. And
there's 10 things that we want and 10 things they want, and 7 are the same. So let's go get that, and then it's like the Hunger Games, right? So let's get past this first part, and then we kill each other after we sort out what the rules are going to be,
Yeah, so the Micromobility Coalition is an industry coalition of our peers, and we know that if we partner together, we will be more effective. And it's not about being more effective in getting what we want. We know we'll be more effective working with the cities that we are because we have relationships with a lot of the same, but a lot of the different, and taking those learnings and consolidating, moving together in one step, one entity is really, really valuable.
For sure.
Okay, I just wanted to offer a story. In Memphis, we have a conference each year, Innovate IT, and we had the pleasure to have Lime and Bird on a session driving tourism. So Sam Sadel.
Yep, great guy.
Anyway, they were great. You could tell friendly, collaborative, really working together on policy. But a story on Lime, Bird had come in first, had an agreement with City of Memphis. Lime entered the market that day, and all the Lime bikes were locked up by the city. So a little bit of a crisis.
Yeah, no.
But I think it got resolved in about a month. So anyway, but it was kind of an interesting front page for Lime.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you're absolutely right. Cities are more savvy these days. And again, the media consumers, policymakers are sharper than they've ever been. And so, coming in and asking for forgiveness or disrupting their communities just doesn't work anymore. And you have to be collaborative. So yeah, we pride ourselves at Lime of really going in and building those relationships and then crafting the right rules for that right community. We got 1 minute left and 52 seconds.
Anyone else?
Any others?
Menacing thing to look at.
Well, Matt, I'll ask you one final one. As we're entering, not even entering, we're in the midst of 2019 now. When you think about the tech space, generally, not just Lime micromobility, but generally, what is 2019 for tech? What are you seeing as that issue that is going to play out? And we're in a presidential election bid, and lots of conversations around tech. Like, where do you see? You're a political whip. Where do you see this going for tech, and what should we be on the lookout for?
I don't think it gets sorted out this year. Nothing's going to get done this entire election cycle. But I think you will see something happen at the federal level. There's too many people that are either running for president or just genuine. There's not that many, I don't think, that are genuinely interested in it and understand it. But it's going after big tech is such an easy, low-hanging fruit for a good headline. I think that you're going to see some of these bigger ones get regulated, and I think they're going to wake up to the idea that just because they're in Silicon Valley and bright blue California, that Democrats aren't necessarily their friends. Just because they're aligned on social issues, they might not be on that question. So I think, the Facebooks, Googles, Amazons, I think they are, the days of them sort of doing whatever they want, however they want to do it, I think are drawing to a close.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that goes back to position yourself properly and, small companies, big companies, that story you tell and how you communicate and what you share sticks with you. And we all have reputations, and you've got to protect those, but you also have to make sure that the story you're offering jives with the policymakers and it actually is solving something or providing value in a tangible way, because it's going to come back and it's going to be much more difficult in the long run.
Hey, thanks for having us here.
Yeah.
I had a nice time.